Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. This video is about fighting superstition and fear with facts. One of my more important contributions to the climate discussion has been creating software which allows people to generate graphs like this one from official NOAA data. Hundreds or thousands of people are using this software, and it's all open source, so people are able to check to see if the code is working properly. What this graph shows is that the frequency of 90-degree days in the United States has plummeted over the last century. For example, during the summer of 1936, nearly half of U.S. daily maximum temperature readings were over 90 degrees. This year it's been just about half that. Could you imagine the mass climate hysteria which would happen now if we had a summer as hot as 1936 again? It's kind of scary to think about. Someone left this message on my blog yesterday. I spoke with friends in Atlanta the other day. They counter the cooling that you talk about by stating that there have been a record number of days over 90 degrees in Atlanta this year. This breaks records going back to at least 1930. Is it just that the southeast corner of the country has seen higher temperatures this year? Let's take a look at that. This map is from the NOAA High Plains Regional Climate Center. It shows the departure from normal temperature since the start of the year. You can see from the green and blue that most of the U.S. has been below normal temperature during 2019. However, temperatures in the southeastern U.S. have been well above normal. And here's an article discussing what the commenter on my blog was referring to. It stated September 28 and said, Atlanta is about to break the record for most 90-degree days in 1 year. And their map shows the jet stream bringing cool air to the west and warm air to the east. So using my software, I looked in more detail at what's been going on in Georgia since the late 19th century. This graph shows the January to October average maximum temperature at all Georgia United States Historical Climatology Network stations. Some things really stand out. From the year 1910 until the mid-1950s, Georgia warmed very quickly. Then there was a sharp cooling period over the next 10 years, and since then it's been warming again. This year has been quite warm in Georgia, but it hasn't been in the top 10 years. The hottest year was in 1954. Now we're looking at the January to October percent of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit at all Georgia U.S. Historical Climatology Network stations. You can see that the trend is sharply downwards, and the hottest year was in 1925. Now let's go back and look at Bill's comment again. It says, this breaks records that go back to at least 1930. So why did the climate alarmists pick 1930 as their start date? Well, it's pretty obvious because 1925 was the hottest year. This is the standard climate alarmist trick of cherry-picking their start point to get the results they want people to believe. Now let's look at the trend of 95-degree days in Georgia. Once again, there's been a sharp downwards trend. 1925 was the hottest year, and this year was not in the top 10. And for the graph of 100-degree days, we see the same thing. The trend is sharply downwards. 1925 was the hottest year, and this year was actually one of the coolest on record. Next, I look at what year Georgia had the most 90-degree days from January 1st through the end of October. The record was set in 1927 when Quitman, Georgia had 155 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. By contrast, the most 90-degree days in Georgia this year was set at Savannah, where they had 114 days above 90 degrees from January through October. So in 1927 they had 155 90-degree days, and this year they only had 114. I also looked at the record for consecutive days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That was set in 1954 when Camilla, Georgia had 102 straight days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you remember from our first graph, 1954 was the year when Georgia had the highest average maximum temperature for the entire year. That was also the year when Hurricane Hazel decimated the southeast U.S., then went up to Canada and killed more than 100 people in Ontario. And that was just a few weeks after New England was hit by two major hurricanes, Carol and Edna. The heat has ended in the southeastern U.S. The jet stream has shifted, and now the eastern U.S. is facing record cold. So we're going to see a lot of this brown area disappear over the next few weeks. Georgia's looking at a lot of cold weather over the next 10 days. Compare that to November 1909 when Quitman, Georgia made it above 70 degrees Fahrenheit every single day. Quitman had 8 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit during November 1909, and their average maximum temperature that month was 84 degrees. Their high temperature on this date in 1909 was 92 degrees. Once again, imagine how hysterical climate alarmists would be if that happened now. Climate alarmism is a house of cards built on fake and misleading statistics. And it's led to an hysteria where scientists are demanding that billions of people be removed from the planet. Children have been the primary victims of the big climate lie. I went to see the movie Jojo Rabbit last night. It was a story about Germany in the 1930s featuring a couple of children who'd been victimized by scientists and government propaganda. One of the children was a German boy who had been taught in school that Jews were evil and that they had things like horns and tails. The other child was a Jewish girl who'd been hidden in the house by the boy's mother in order to protect her from the German authorities. It took a long time for the boy to understand how he'd been lied to by his teachers and by authorities. It was pretty obvious that this girl did not have horns or a tail. But when children are brainwashed by authorities, it's very hard for them to see the world clearly. And that's exactly what's happened to Greta Thunberg. She's a victim of the dishonest adults who surround her. They're using her to achieve their political agenda. Hatred and fear are very powerful. I'm a Jew and I have no idea how many of my relatives were killed in Germany during the 1930s and 1940s. They were victims of fear and propaganda from scientists and the government in Germany. The movie Jojo Rabbit showed how brainwashed children were at the center of what went on in Germany during the 1930s and 1940s. And then when I went to school in the 1960s, I was brainwashed to believe that Germans were bad people and that Russians were bad people too. Later I married a Russian Soviet refugee and found out that she'd been brainwashed exactly the same way. They were taught that Americans were bad people. It all comes down to brainwashing from authorities and scientists. Russians aren't bad people, Germans aren't bad people, Jews aren't bad people. The bad people are the people in government and the scientific community who are pushing the big lie. I'm a scientist and I grew up in the scientific community. Scientists have done a lot of great things for humanity, and they've also done a lot of very bad things. Scientists have played a key role in many genocides by pushing things like Lysenkoism and eugenics. That's one reason why I'm doing everything I can to protect our children from dishonest scientists, journalists, and politicians who are pushing climate alarmism. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.